This is a guide to installing the Portland Design Works full metal fenders. We'll be installing the 700 by 55mm size in this video, but this guide applies to all sizes of full metal fenders. Every bike frame has its own little quirks when installing fenders, so if you aren't much of a bike mechanic, you might want to have these installed at your local bike shop, where they'll know all the little tricks to mounting these to your specific bike. Alright, let's get started. At a minimum, you're going to need a pliers and 2, 3, and 4mm Allen wrenches. You may end up needing an 8mm wrench and a hacksaw as well, depending on if you need to cut down the length of your fender stays. Grab one of the anti-rattle stickers with holes in it and apply it to the front fender where the front stay is going to attach. Do the same for where the 2 rear stays attach to the rear fender. Now you're going to need the front fender stay, 2 of the 8mm long bolts, but make sure you don't grab the shorter 6mm long bolts. And then you need a top stay plate and threaded bottom stay plate. The front fender stay is the one that has the safety release tabs on it. Put the stay on top of the anti-rattle sticker, the top stay plate over that, then the bottom stay plate underneath. Now you can just thread the bolts on with a 3mm Allen wrench. There's no need to completely tighten these now because you'll cinch them down harder once they're positioned nicely around your wheel. Go ahead and repeat this process for the 2 rear stays as well. Alright, it's mud flap time. The front mud flap is the shorter of the 2 and will need a bottom plate as well as 2 of the little stubby 6mm bolts. Before attaching the mud flaps, I like to bend them along the fold lines a bit to give them some 3-dimensionality. You're going to put the plate underneath and just thread those bolts on. The mud flap is going to attach to the inside of the fender, and you can go ahead and tighten those down all the way. For the longer rear mud flap, you're just going to do the same thing as you did for the front. Fold it a bit, bolt it onto the rear fender, and then you're good. Now you're going to remove both wheels from your bike. If you're not already familiar with how to remove and reinstall your wheels, it's probably a good sign that you should have your full metal fenders installed at a bike shop by a professional mechanic. Now it's time to mount the front fender to the fork crown. The design of fork crowns varies a whole lot, so you'll have to attach the front fender hanger to your fork crown based on the specific design of your fork. Some forks have threaded holes in the front, some have threaded holes in the back, some have no threads on the holes, but the holes go all the way through. So just choose a combination of a bolt or bolt plus washers that'll get this thing on your bike. No need to completely tighten this bolt yet because you want to adjust the fender up and down once you have that wheel back in and see how close the fender is to your wheel. The next step is to attach the safety tabs to your fork eyelets using a lock washer and the bolts with blocky heads on them. If the safety tabs interfere with your disc brake caliper or with your dropouts, you can just space them away from your fork with the included alloy spacers or with a stack of washers. After you reinstall your wheel, use a 2mm Allen wrench to loosen the little bolts on the safety tabs so you can adjust the position of the fender on the wheel. If the stays are too long for your bike, you're going to have to trim them down a little bit. Ideally, you'll cut these down with a hacksaw while they're held in a vise because that'll just make it easy for you. If you don't have a vise, you can even use a tin snips or a strong cable cutter. The thing to remember the most is measure twice, cut once. Now that the stays are the correct length, we can position the fender closer to the tire and tighten up all of these bolts. So of course there's those bolts on the safety tabs. There are the little 2mm bolts that keep the stays in place. And then don't forget about the bolt on the fork crown, and the little bolts that hold the stay onto the fender itself. All right, now we can spin the wheel and check to see if there's any rubbing. And if there isn't, you are done with the front fender. Now would be a good time to take a break, get a drink of water, pet your dog, and then we'll install the rear fender. The first step for the rear fender installation is to bolt the rear hanger to the seat stay bridge with a bolt and washer. Just like the fork crown, there are a lot of different styles of seat stay bridges, so you might be able to bolt the hanger directly to the frame, you might need a washer and nut, or you might even need to order up a special small part from PDW if the hole is underneath the brake bridge. Take the rear fender and line it up so that the hole at the front of the fender lines up with your chainstay bridge. Now you're going to mark where the rear hanger is on the fender, because the next thing we're going to do is apply an anti-rattle sticker to this area so the rear hanger isn't directly touching the fender. Now just double check to make sure the sticker and the hole by the chainstay bridge line up where we want them. The sticker lines up, the bolt hole lines up as well, so we are good to go. Grab your pliers and we can crimp that rear hanger onto the fender on top of the anti-rattle sticker. You can get it started with your fingers, but to really get it on there snugly, you're going to want to flatten all 4 tabs down with the pliers. And then you're going to bolt the fender loosely, because you may still want to move it up or down depending on where your tire sits. Next, get a bolt, washer, and probably a spacer to bolt the fender onto the chainstay bridge. It depends on how far the fender ends up from your rear tire once you put the wheel back on, but most bikes are going to need a little spacer between the fender and the chainstay bridge in order to get it nice and close to your rear tire. To attach the rear stays to the frame, you're going to grab 2 of the 20mm long bolts and a couple lock washers, and then you're just going to run that bolt through both of the stay tabs and into the threaded eyelets on your frame. Loosen the stay adjustment bolts with a 3mm Allen wrench so we can adjust where the fender is when we put the rear wheel back in. As you can see here, the stays are too long for this bike setup, so we're just going to cut those down like we did with the front stay. Hey, that's a whole lot better. Now we're just going to go around and tighten up all of those bolts. So many bolts. But once you've got them all tightened up, sort of wiggle the fender around, make sure it's stable, and then you can spin the wheel, cross your fingers, hope there's no rubbing at all. And if there isn't, grab that bike and go out and ride.